DKIM, DMARC, SPF, Best Practices for Email Security and Deliverability in 2025. The new reality for B2B outbound email in 2025. If your cold emails feel like they're disappearing more often, you're seeing the market reality. Inbox providers are filtering harder than ever, and they're doing it at global scale. In 2024, spam made up 47.27% of global email traffic, which means even legitimate B2B outreach is evaluated in an environment where suspicious until proven otherwise is the default. For SDR teams, that turns deliverability into a daily constraint, not a background technical detail. At the same time, deliverability benchmarks show global inbox placement around 83.5%, which effectively means about 1 out of every 6 legitimate emails never reaches the inbox. When you're running outbound at scale, that's not a rounding error. It's a direct hit to reply rates, meetings booked, and pipeline created. If you're investing in a sales development motion, whether in-house or through a sales outsourcing partner, you can't afford to lose volume to avoidable filtering. The key shift in 2025 is that mailbox providers are no longer encouraging good behavior, they're enforcing it. Google and Yahoo's bulk sender rules and similar pressure across Microsoft ecosystems effectively make SPF, DKIM, and DMARC table stakes, especially once you scale sequences across multiple reps and tools. If you're a cold email agency, an SDR agency, or a B2B sales agency building predictable outbound, authentication is the foundation you build on, not a final step. Why authentication is a security requirement and a pipeline multiplier. Email remains the preferred attack surface, and mailbox providers optimize for user safety first. In 2025, an estimated 3.4 billion phishing emails are sent every day, and email is used in about 91% of cyber attacks. So providers are paid by users and brand trust to aggressively block anything that looks off. That's why unauthenticated outbound isn't just less effective, it's treated as high risk by default. The business cost is also very real. Business email compromise losses reported to the FBI reached roughly $2.9 billion in 2023. When your domain is easy to spoof, you're not only risking your brand, you're making prospects and customers more vulnerable to scams that use your identity. DMARC enforcement is one of the few controls that directly reduces spoofing at the inbox provider layer. For revenue teams, the payoff is straightforward. Fully authenticated senders, SPF, DKIM, and DMARC, have been measured as 2.7x more likely to reach the inbox than unauthenticated senders. That's why we treat authentication like a revenue lever, not just IT plumbing, because it changes how many prospects can even see your message. If you're evaluating cold calling services alongside email outreach, deliverability is the silent variable that determines whether your outbound mix actually performs. SPF, DKIM, and DMARC in plain English, with the parts that matter for SDRs. SPF is your "Who is allowed to send for this domain" list, published in DNS as a TXT record. It's essential, but sales teams run into two practical realities. SPF evaluates the envelope sender, not always the visible from address, and it has a strict limit of 10 DNS lookups, so piling on too many tools can silently break validation. If your CRM, sales engagement platform, and help desk all send mail and you include everything without planning, you can fail SPF even though you tried to do the right thing. DKIM is your "Was this message altered and is it cryptographically signed?" proof. It's typically more resilient than SPF in forwarding scenarios, and it's a major trust signal for inbox providers, especially when your DKIM domain aligns with the from domain your prospect sees. In 2025, you should treat 2048-bit DKIM keys as the default when your vendor supports them, and keep selectors organized so you can rotate keys without breaking outbound. DMARC sits above SPF and DKIM and tells receivers what to do when alignment fails, while also generating reports that show exactly who is sending as you. This is where security and deliverability meet. DMARC helps block spoofing, and it also forces you to get your tooling aligned so mailbox providers see consistency. The adoption gap is still shocking. Only about 18.2% of the top 10 million domains have valid DMARC, and just 7.6% enforce quarantine or reject. So teams that implement it correctly gain both protection and a competitive deliverability edge. A rollout sequence that improves deliverability without breaking legitimate mail. The safest way to implement authentication is to treat it like a controlled production release. Start by inventorying every system that sends from your domain. SDR sequencing tools, marketing automation, CRM alerts, support, billing, calendar tools, and any vendor that can send on your behalf. Then, validate SPF and DKIM for each sender and confirm at least one method aligns with the domain in the visible from header, because alignment is what DMARC actually enforces. Next, publish DMARC at p=none and turn on aggregate reporting so you can see real-world traffic before you enforce anything. This is the step most teams skip, and it's also why they accidentally block quotes, invoices, or meeting invites when they jump straight to enforcement. DMARC reports become a practical dashboard for RevOps and IT. Which sources pass, which fail, and which mystery senders are spoofing you or misconfigured. Once the reports are clean, tighten policy in phases. Quarantine first, then reject, potentially using a partial rollout percentage while you monitor. This phased approach is also how you keep your outbound motion stable while you protect the brand, especially if you run multiple domains for an outsourced sales team or manage complex sending across regions. The goal isn't to flip a switch. It's to steadily eliminate ambiguity so mailbox providers can confidently place your emails in the inbox. Treat email authentication like a revenue project. If the inbox can't trust you, your prospects can't reply to you. Best practices for cold outbound domains, volumes, and reputation. Your main corporate domain should not be the crash test dummy for high-volume experimentation. In practice, the most durable approach is using separate but related domains or subdomains for SDR outreach, each with its own SPF, DKIM, and DMARC, and a deliberate warm-up plan. That way, a deliverability mistake reduces outbound capacity instead of impacting critical company workflows like customer success, billing, and security notifications. Spam complaints matter as much as messaging because user-level signals now heavily influence placement. Gmail's recommended ceiling is around 0.1% spam complaints, and repeatedly exceeding that is a fast path to throttling or spam foldering even if your authentication is perfect. SDR leaders should treat complaint rate, bounce rate, and inbox placement as campaign health metrics, right alongside reply rate. This is also where tooling choices show up in outcomes. Shared spray and pray sending environments can tank your results because your reputation is influenced by other senders. If you care about long-term deliverability, isolate infrastructure where possible, authenticate every sender, and ensure opt-outs are honored consistently across platforms. Whether you run in-house or through a cold email agency, the difference between "we sent emails" and "we booked meetings" often comes down to reputation discipline. Common mistakes that quietly kill meetings, and how to prevent them. The most expensive mistake is setting DMARC to p=reject before you've audited every sender. It feels secure, but it's how teams suddenly discover their SDR sequences, CRM workflows, or vendor notifications are being rejected, often without obvious error messages in the moment. The fix is simple and methodical. DMARC p=none first, read the reports, remediate every legitimate source, then tighten enforcement when the data proves you're ready. Another common failure is using the primary corporate domain for aggressive outbound, then acting surprised when the entire organization's deliverability degrades. If you trigger a blocklist event or a complaint spike, it doesn't just impact cold outreach. It can affect invoices, renewals, partner comms, and executive email. A separate domain strategy is risk management, and it's a practical one that most high-performing outbound sales agency teams standardize early. Finally, many teams publish a DMARC record and never look at it again, which defeats the reporting half of the protocol. DMARC reports are where you catch a newly added vendor, a broken DKIM selector after a tool migration, or a spoofing wave aimed at your brand. If you run sales outsourcing, treat DMARC reporting as operational telemetry. Review it monthly with RevOps and IT so outbound stays stable while security improves. Operationalizing deliverability. Ownership, reporting, and continuous improvement. The fastest way to improve results is aligning ownership across teams instead of letting deliverability live in a blind spot. IT, or whoever manages DNS, owns SPF, DKIM, DMARC correctness. RevOps owns tool documentation and reporting workflows, and sales leadership owns sending behavior, volume, targeting, and content quality. When those three functions share a single scoreboard, authentication stops being a one-time project and becomes a steady advantage. In practice, that means you operationalize a few recurring checks. Confirm SPF isn't exceeding lookup limits, confirm DKIM signatures are passing across vendors, and confirm DMARC alignment on real sends from each platform. Then you tie those technical checks to outbound behaviors that mailbox providers reward: steady ramp schedules, clean lists, and sequences designed to earn replies rather than generate complaints. For teams that also run B2B cold calling services or telemarketing, this discipline keeps email healthy while phone drives additional touches. You also need a documented sender map that stays current as tools change. Most B2B orgs have 3 to 5 or more systems sending mail on their behalf, and each one can break alignment if it's only half configured. A clean map of domains, vendors, DKIM selectors, and SPF includes removes guesswork and reduces the odds of a silent deliverability regression. Next steps for 2025: protect the brand, improve inboxing, and scale outbound safely. If you want the most leverage with the least disruption, start with a tight inventory and a phased DMARC plan. Validate SPF and DKIM across every sender, publish DMARC with reporting, and use the reports to drive remediation until alignment is consistently passing. Then move to quarantine and ultimately reject, because strict enforcement is how you reduce spoofing risk and make mailbox provider trust durable over time. For outbound specifically, pair authentication with a domain strategy designed for scale. Dedicated SDR domains, conservative warm-up, and complaint rate discipline are the difference between sustainable outreach and a cycle of burned domains. Remember, when global inbox placement is around 83.5%, the teams that control what they can control, authentication and reputation, win more of the available inbox real estate. At SalesHive, we treat this as part of building a modern outbound engine, not an optional add-on. As a B2B sales agency and sales development agency, delivering sales outsourcing and cold calling services alongside email, we've learned that deliverability is the multiplier that makes every other optimization matter. If your team wants to scale without turning into email authentication specialists, the most practical move is to set a monthly review cadence. Measure complaints against the 0.1% bar and keep SPF, DKIM, DMARC aligned as your stack evolves.